I really want to focus on running backs here, Justin, because you and I especially, we not only make sure we get our own premier handcuffs, but we also roster other handcuffs to other top tier running backs, because if those top tier running backs get injured, there's always opportunity for these other guys to step up. And I just want to, not that people don't know this, but I just think it's something to talk about, is like, what can you do to prepare for these injuries before they happen? And also, how do you deal with them when they do happen? What's your basic philosophy when it comes to that, Justin?
I have a two-pronged approach. And the reason it's developed into this is because experience has shown me this is the way to go.
Yes.
It's probably been overplayed. It's probably been stated on every podcast, every single write up, but you need to secure your handcuff. With that said, if you lose a Zeke and you have a Pollard, you're going to get downgraded, but not by a lot. If you
Yeah.
let somebody snag Pollard, then they just hit that lottery ticket on you and you have nothing to show for it. So, what would I rather roster? A fringe flex wide receiver or my handcuff to my elite running back? I'm going to go elite running back every day of the week. And then on the next piggyback to that is to grab not only other people's handcuffs, but lottery tickets. Maybe young rookies. Like, look at what Gainwell's doing. He probably wasn't
Yes.
drafted. If the Sanders guy drafted him, that's about it. Michael Carter could be a late round stash. Who else is out there that you look at? Like,
Well, I look at one of your teams, James Conner.
there you go.
Uh, yeah, James Conner is a good one. Like, I initially drafted him in one of our leagues, and I'm like, it's not that I'm planning on starting him. It's that if anything ever happened to Edmonds, he would just get a lot of work. And that's another point. It doesn't have to be the most talented guys. Like, look, Pollard, Madison, those guys are super talented. They can be RB1s on another team. But like, it doesn't have to be the 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 super talented guys who we think should be starting on other rosters. It's a guy like a James Conner who, just due to opportunity, could step into a role.
It,
And yeah,
it's interesting because James Conner is actually a unique situation because not only is that offense pretty much standalone-ish on its style of play, but James Conner might literally be flex worthy at this point because he is getting past. Here's his 4 weeks: 16 carries, 8 carries, 11, 18. He's got 2 touchdowns in each of the last 2 games. He might just be a volume guy that you can trust, and Edmonds is a PPR guy that you can play at the same time. So that's a unique situation. But you know what's an undercover one that people are listening to this, they might get some lottery off of it. It's Marlon Mack, by the way. I don't know if we
and
spoke about him, but with the team agreeing to trade him, when an injury or two pop up, what if he just doesn't get traded soon to one of these teams that needs a running back and he all of a sudden becomes a plug and play guy and you just hit the lottery off of that? That's the type of secureness that I rather have than random wide receivers that aren't ever going to see my starting lineup.
yeah, no, I agree. And that's another point which you didn't necessarily mention, is what are you sacrificing in order to roster these guys? And I'll tell you what, Justin, you mentioned that, yeah, every podcast mentions to roster handcuffs, but there are I feel like it's split among the fantasy community, that there are people who do not think that you should roster handcuffs. They think it limits the ceiling of your roster, that like you're rostering a handcuff, a guy you may never start or may never even step into an opportunity because the guy in front of him never gets hurt. And you're not rostering a wide receiver that can blow up and become a high end wide receiver too. And it's like, look, it depends, because like we already see it. There's running back injuries almost every week, and people need running backs. And especially once you get to bye weeks and the injuries, what are you going to do? You're going to throw in some random guy you pick up off the waiver wire to start if you don't have that wide receiver 2 spot. I think that, and sometimes these handcuff guys, like Tony Pollard, right? Sometimes they're usable during bye weeks. Like, you don't have any other option, you throw them into your flex.
Not only
So
that,
yeah,
when going back to those people that don't believe in handcuffs, I love those people because that means I get them. Like,
Yes.
look at the young comers that last year you didn't know about. AJ Dillon. If you're an Aaron Jones owner and you don't have AJ Dillon, if Jones goes out, all of a sudden the AJ Dillon owns an RB1 fringe possibility. Like,
Exactly.
that's the nuts part to me, because not only could you use him as potential trade bait, but you can gain that league winning player that you didn't have at the draft. So that, to me, I don't understand it, but hey, if people want to do it, I'll be happy to capitalize on their loss.
Yeah, and I listened to a lot of fantasy podcasts over the past couple years, and there are like people who do this for a living, straight up, like they get paid to do this, and this is their thought process. And look, technically, this is all subjective. If you think that rostering high upside guys, non-handcuff guys are is a better strategy, that's your opinion, and if you think that works, that's fine. But I'm just saying my opinion, and Justin's opinion too, is that some of these people, they like are straight up against handcuffs. They're like, I would never roster, like, why would I ever draft Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb? Like, why would I limit my roster that way? And I'm like, and they feel very strongly about it. And I'm just here to say I feel very strongly about handcuffs. And it's like, look, Justin, you seen my roster before we made our trades last night. I had like ran wide receivers on. Look, I had Tyler Higbee. I could drop him if I had to because I have Kelsey. I had Justin Fields, and I had like Jacoby Myers at the bottom of my bench. Love Jacoby Myers, but looking at my roster, when am I ever going to start him? I'd rather roster a guy like Kenneth Gainwell. And even though you look at the Yahoo projections, Myers projected for 14. He's a nice piece you could throw into your flex, but would you rather, unless you desperately need him every week, would you rather have him or a lottery ticket like Gainwell, who's sitting there waiting? And to be honest, even a situation like Gainwell, there are some rare scenarios where the second guy just outperforms the other guy. And we talked last night about how I think I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a possibility that Gainwell just takes that role because he's so good. And Miles Sanders kind of just becomes the backup. So that's always a possibility too. That's not going to happen with Madison or Pollard, but I mean, maybe with Pollard, we've
Not
potentially
the way
seen that day.
Zeke's run in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, but Zeke's good. He's been running well. But yeah. So basically, look, why would you roster a guy at the bottom of your bench who you're never going to start, and who could never make that jump? Like Jacoby Myers is as good as he's going to get, right? Like he's getting a lot of targets. He's performing. He's putting up, depending on your scoring, he's putting up like 15 points a game, whatever, lately. So, you are basically just, it just depends on your preference and how your roster's structured and what you need. But I just think that this is the way to go. And we do have a couple other comments here. Do you have any last thoughts on that, Justin, before we head
Well, no,
out?
I think we hit it. Just to piggy on Jacoby Myers, I think that we haven't seen his best, because I know Mac is young, Belichick plays it safe, but if he can find the end zone week here, week there, he goes into an amazing player with an amazing floor. Like,
Yeah.
he might be a versatile Boyd, if that makes sense. So I'm
Yeah.
happy
No.
to see
And
him grow.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I kind of lost my train of thought. But what I was saying is that, like, Jacoby Myers' ceiling is really good, right? Like you said, maybe a Boyd type, or like, we don't think it's possible, but we don't think Jacoby Myers is going to be a wide receiver one. Like, he could be a solid wide receiver two. I think that's his ceiling,
Yeah,
and he's not even there yet. Solid wide receiver two. But what is Kenneth Gainwell's ceiling if Miles Sanders gets hurt? An RB1.
beautiful
So like,
PPR back, that's for sure.
so that's what I'm saying is, like, you want that lottery ticket. Like, do you want the $10,000 lottery ticket or do you want the $1 million lottery ticket? You want the $1 million lottery ticket. And that's basically the point of all
Yep,
this.
agreed.